We have Dr. Anup Kelgaonkar, he's a clinician, surgeon, educator, and researcher at LV Prasad Eye Institute, Bhubaneswar.
I just want to add that Anup is a great researcher, though the PERT and PORT that you saw in the last presentation are actually described by Anup here.
Um, Thank you. It's always good to be in Mumbai, and good morning, everyone. Uh, Now I'm in the East Coast, rather, in Bhubaneswar. So, masquerades is the topic that was allocated to me, and uveitis is very heterogeneous. It's my sixth year in uveitis, and let me tell you, the first year of my practice, I used to get a lot of surprise TPHA positivities. I don't know that it is syphilis or not. Send for a TPHA, get it positive. And over last 6 years, what has happened is that surprise TPHA positives have got down. So what I feel about this masquerades is it takes few years to figure it out. And once initially those algorithms in our minds are done, the masquerades start going down. So as you see, most of the masquerades here won't be masquerades after you see these cases for 4 or 5 years. And the term masquerade itself, one of the meanings is nightmare, and indeed they are sometimes very nightmare in the OPD. Over the years, I found out two P's to encounter this masquerades and to get away with it. And I assure you, it's nothing to do with ophthalmology. It is the poise and a pause that you take in the OPD. So going on to the cases, I will describe the case-based scenario. I think this was already described by my earlier speakers, and just an awareness of HLA-B20 and ophthalmitis are look alike, see alike, and you need to differentiate is important. Why is it important? Is vitritis can happen in HLA-B27, and B scan can show that it is. Again, this image is tricked and cropped to conceal some things. It's an aphakia being managed by a retina surgeon. And what this actually is, it's a traumatic endophthalmitis. There is a CTR and sorry, a scleral tear and aphakia. And if you see this granular yellow KP looking like structures, they can happen in any endophthalmitis. Third thing, viral recurrent anterior uveitis on antiviral maintenance dose for 6 months, AGMs for 1 year, presenting with chemosis, and sometimes in a BZOPD, one could think that it is recurrence of uveitis, which it was not. It was a plain and simple anti-glaucoma medication allergy, and stopping the drug or changing the drug was only intervention between these 10 days. I would like to change the gears now and start to come to the posterior segment where we have some masquerades. Let's start with this lady, 59-year-old female, referred to me as a case of granulomatous anterior-uveitis. You see the KPs. They're diffuse and they were pigmented. But sometimes ischemia can mimic inflammation. And the way to differentiate is these KPs are not voluminous like what we see in granulomatous anterior-uveitis that my earlier colleagues showed. So when we did an angiography, this she had what we call in diabetes as peripheral predominant disease with aneurysms spread out to the periphery. You see capillary non-perfusion areas and neovascularizations in the left eye. Further, this lady had hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, a heart disease, and carotid insufficiency. So, ischemia of the eye can not only mimic KPs, it can also cause CCC or anterior congestion, even a posterior subcapsular cataract, and make you think of various differentials, retina examination, and posterior pole angiography. And I mean, angiography would do a great difference. This was after UCCon 2022, I believe. I had seen that many cases, those cases that Dr. Mohit showed and others showed, probably an abscess at the posterior pole, probably a toxo at the posterior pole. Who knows? We went inside, did a vitrectomy, thinking it to be headlight in the fog. What it turns out to be just a plain and simple subialum hemorrhage. It would seem simple, but when you are seeing in a predominant uvea OPD this patient, you kind of mistake it at times. I like toxo, and toxoplasma is also an area of research. This was referred to me saying it's an recurrence near the old scar. We passed an OCT to find out that this is not a cavitation that we can see here, which gives rise to a halo or a depigmented appearance and mimicking choroidal reactivation. It's not bright, it's not fuzzy, it's just plain and simple, very dry looking choroidal cavitation. Go on to the next case, and this was very interesting in my initial stage of career when this man, a young man, presented with one-eyed status. The other eye was lost to proptosis. Started on anti-tubercular therapy by an ophthalmologist elsewhere. You see multiple yellowish lesions there, peripheral sclerosed vessels are there, hemorrhages are there. The giveaway in this is tortuous veins with pink colored blood. And these are the infiltrates in the retina that one can see in CML, actually the acute blast crisis. And it mimics retinitis to a very large extent. Someone could take it as CMV at times, CMV retinitis or other things, but it's nothing related to the uveitis. Similarly, and look at this case, and if you have looked at it, you know what it is. But at times it could mimic uveitis, especially the papillary fibrosis ring, the atrophy periphery. But this is a giveaway, even though there are membranes. This was a case of PVRL. Elderly age of onset is something you have to look at. Uveitis would start in the 30s or 40s. It's very rare to get uveitis starting in 50s. It is look out for the masquerades. And as Dr. Mohit was pointing in his presentation, OCT is a way to go to diagnose it. These are very simple and straightforward. At times, chronic retinal detachments can have posterior synechia, neovascularization of the angle, amongst other things. The photograph below was oxidative retinal detachment with vitritis, especially the eyes with myopia and retinochoroidal thinning would have, with retinal detachment, would present to like a vitreous haze. But these are cases of retinal detachment, rhegmatogenous one only. Would wonder, is this serpiginous like choroiditis or is it, I don't know, azure? But this was nothing to do with uveitis. This was post trauma, outer retinal and RP atrophy. The way to differentiate it would be a very static and one time entity. Couple of weeks, whatever the resolution has, it would stay like that. Going to the next one, I will probably rush through since the time is a bit short. You see something yellow here, and angiography and OCT is the key. We got she had a history of B cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It very rarely affects the breast secondarily, and here it did. And this is a very typical angiography picture where you get all of these hypers without an initial hypo. We of course progressed it, and CD20 BCL2 was positive. This is a case we recently presented in RetNet as well, and this is a big trouble. CA lungs, especially the adenocarcinoma, can mimic tuberculoma. The way to get it out is these discrete lesions on the surface, the moth-eaten-like appearance on the RPE, the pinpoint leakages around it, and especially the B scan. That would be a giveaway. Band-shaped keratopathy with vitreous wheels at times could be because of degeneration and not, uh, early onset sarcoid or JIA. This was a case of SLN8, CLN8 um, disease. And similarly, this was what I thought initially as syphilis, looking at the OCT, and later as autoimmune retinopathy after TPHA was done, turned out to be a PRPH2 retinopathy. So PRPH2 retinopathy can mimic autoimmune retinopathy in its early stages, non-atrophic stages. So just summarize, we have to be aware of infections, metastasis, choroid and retinal tumors and inherited retinal dystrophies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anup, for debunking the myth that masquerade can only be any cancer or any lymphomas, but they can be anything otherwise what you typically think of.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And let me ask Dr. Mayur that, uh, of course, uveitis is side threatening, but is there something life threatening as well in uveitis?
So obviously, since the talk is on masquerade, I would reply to it in that scenario. What happens in masquerades is that there is an entity called primary vitreoretinal lymphoma, and there is a entity called CNS lymphoma. The idea is to catch the disease while it is still in the eye, because for when you look at it from mortality point of view, the life expectancy is much longer and the mortality rate is much lesser if you catch it in the eye. And as much as you let it bake in the eye, it goes into CNS, and then once it has gone to CNS, the life expectancy becomes very low and the mortality rate becomes very high. So, as the uveitis specialists, as general ophthalmologists, or as ophthalmologists, it's up to us to try to catch that disease while it is still in the eye before it actually goes to the brain.
Thank you for making us aware of that. Thank you, Dr. Anup. And I would like to ask one question to Dr. Hitesh. While we are winding up, we have a couple of minutes. Dr. Hitesh, for the benefit of all of us here, uh, if if a patient of uveitis does require cataract surgery, what would be your reiteration to everyone who does cataracts in a uveitis patient? Could you give a couple of pearls?
So, uveitic cataract surgery, so I should be completely quiet. As we say, minimum 3 months should be the ideal period before the eyes are quiet, and you should rule out complications. See for cystoid macular edema, document everything, and explain the patient, see the primary diagnosis, what exactly it is. At times, steroid cover, most of the cases which are complicated cases, you would require a steroid cover, but in certain exceptions like Fuchs uveitis, you can avoid steroid cover and document everything, explain recurrences in spite of having a good cataract surgery, expect all complications and record everything. So these are little bit pearls, and I know everyone is a good cataract surgeon, but record everything.
Yes, so the takeaway point is that if yes, we have one question, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is the dose of the antiviral medicine which we prescribe in uveitis either, or keratouveitis, which often we see in the long-standing case? What is the dose in an adult patient of average weight?
Dr. Mohit, would you like to take that?
So if I understood the question, sir, you want to know the dose of the oral antiviral that we would give.
Yes, yes.
So it depends on what the patient can or cannot afford. If the patient is affording, the patient should be taking tablet val acyclovir and not acyclovir, because the dosing frequency is lesser. So you typically would want to give 1 gram thrice a day of oral val acyclovir. The issue with that is that it's expensive. If expenses are a concern, then we resort to our age old, these what was initially the standard of care, which is oral acyclovir. Oral acyclovir depends if you're looking at it from an ocular surface cornea standpoint, or you're looking at it from an intraocular infection slash inflammation standpoint. If you are able to differentiate whether it is HSV or VZV, then the dose of your oral acyclovir will vary. It will be either 400 milligram 5 times a day for HSV 1 and 2. If it's VZV, then it will be double. It will be 800 milligram 5 times a day. It's cheaper, but the frequency is 5 times. So 5 times means the patient has to wake up in the middle of the night for a considerable length of time to try and ensure that the round the clock, blood levels are maintained. So val acyclovir is preferred. Cost is a concern. If not, then 400 milligram 5 times a day oral acyclovir for HSV 1 and 2, and 800 milligram 5 times a day for VZV.
Is it possible to provide to ask the patient to continue the acyclovir 5 times daily for 6 months?
Again, sir, depends on what the underlying pathology is. If you're treating acute retinal necrosis versus you are wanting to treat necrotizing or non-necrotizing viral stromal keratitis, the to keep it simple, if you have anterior segment involvement by herpes virus versus posterior segment involvement by herpes virus, they are different. They are different on two major points. The posterior segment involvement by herpes virus is almost always hematogenous and is almost always non-recurrent. It's a one-time event. It's a severe infection, and you want to really bombard the eye and the body with as much antiviral as you can. So you want to try and give intravenous. You might want to give, intraocular also. And typically there it'll either be 6 weeks or 3 months maximum therapy. I'm not talking about rare circumstances. Whereas if it's anterior segment involvement, it is almost never hematogenous. It is generally neural, and that is why it is marked by multiple recurrences. So you can almost never rid the eye of that bug, of that virus, once it's in the anterior part of the eye. So you start with the therapeutic dose. After you're done, after you're okay, you might need to continue a low dose, which is 400 BD or 800 OD, depending on what you're doing, for a very long time. So there is no one answer for this, sir.
So what will be the duration of the anterior segment disease? It is for 6 months or 1 year or 2 years?
Not set in stone, sir. Not set in stone.
So we are doing it very empirically. We are giving 400 PD or 800 PD
For
for
herpetic,
anterior segment disease, which you often face for a
Yeah, for anterior segment disease, 400 BID for, as he said, for a very long time. Typically, if it's affecting the cornea, so it will be at least a year, sometimes 2 years. Very difficult to say when to stop.
Yes. Thank you. We have one
Yeah,
question
yeah,
from Sam.
I just want to react to the last point about cataract surgery and uveitis. If we are talking of non-infectious uveitis, and we're pretty sure about it, you see, for decades we have been taught, under steroid cover. No longer. I don't do that. I put Ozurex at the end of it because this has multiple advantages that you don't need to give oral steroids. Plus, other advantages, you don't need to give even topical steroids. Only thing I gave is atropine and some lubricant drop. So that in my practice has helped quite a bit. No longer otherwise patient come pushing over long period of time. So Ozurex has come as a boon in such patient, provided it is non-infectious anterior uveitis with a lot of synechiae and cataract.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that point. I think it makes sense. Yes.
Just one line in extension to Sir's comment. Sir, sometimes when we do a lot of manipulation, like lot of synechia, if you're breaking the synechia, there's so much of manipulation going on. So the only problem with Ozurdex might be that it is going to elute the drug at a fixed level, and it is going to be very, very low. So if you feel that the manipulation has been a lot and you need to give a lot of steroids initially, so for that, the Ozurdex may not help. So you might still have to give perioperative uh, systemic steroids. And then, of course, the Ozurdex is going to take over.